After Plato founded the Academy in Athens in 385 BCE, Platonism would remain one of the most consequential philosophic systems in history. For over 1,000 years, it attracted followers and students of such eminence as Xenocrates, Plutarch, Apuleius, Philo, and many more. Platonism is divided by historians and scholars into different periods, respective of certain nuances and developments in the philosophy as it endured through the Hellenistic period and late antiquity. Thus, Middle and Neoplatonism are inventions for historical utility, with each their own respective philosophers. However, the terms Middle and Neoplatonism were never used by these later philosophers. Rather, they were Platonists and did not necessarily believe they had introduced more than Plato had already covered. Covered, that is, in a veil not easily pierced by the profane. Many Platonists were not exclusively Platonic in their approaches, but utilized other philosophies, such as Stoicism, to illustrate their points, much as the Neoplatonist Iamblichus used the Hermetic writings to inform his teachings. Many later Platonists recognized that Plato was but one profound link in a more ancient philosophic chain, stretching back to Zarathustra, Orpheus, and the elder Hermes. One such Platonist, who exercised an unforgettable finesse in the story of the world's philosophic development, was Plotinus, born in Lycopolis, Egypt, around 204 CE. It is often said that after Plato and Aristotle, Plotinus is the most important philosopher, especially in terms of the Western esoteric tradition. Nonetheless, he is often underread in this confused modern time, despite the gripping nature of his writings and the direct spiritual relevance they still maintain. This essay is purposed not only to sketch a biography of Plotinus, but to review the more mystical teachings in his masterwork, the Enneads, which, to put it simply, are 6 larger books, or Enneads, with smaller tractates included in each. The sheer volume of his writings, their richness and inventiveness, contains such a wealth of ideas that one could spend decades deriving new meaning and spying new flourishes of insight in their study. While we intend to treat different Plotinian tractates with videos of their own, for this essay we focus on certain general themes, with an emphasis on the Ennead's mystical passages. We will hear from some scholars and contemporaries that the terms mystical and mysticism are problematic and somehow misleading or too often applied to persons or religious matters out of context. However, this term is often only as problematic as we make it to be, to the point that one might suggest it is primarily problematic for those who have not experienced the mystical aspect of their consciousness and who perhaps approach the writings of real mystics through a bias of lacking such mystical experience. Philosophy, we must remember, is always better in practice than in the mere words which explain and exercise it. Are there cases where mysticism can be misapplied? No doubt there are. If we look at the origins of the words mystic and mystical, however, we will find that in the case of Plotinus, these terms are indispensable. Actually, should anyone insist that Plotinus does not qualify as a mystic or that his writings do not intend on an overarching mystical development of the soul, I maintain that they do not have any bearings on the subject at hand, and the passages that follow will back me up in saying so. The word mystery derives from the Greek verb mien, meaning to close, which means closing the lips or the eyes. In the sense of the mystery religions and their secretive rituals, this pertained to the retainment of the vowed secrets as portrayed in the rituals, such as those celebrated in ancient Egypt and at Eleusis and Samothrace, and those set up in Rome dedicated to Isis, Sol Invictus, and those mysteries called Mithraic. This closed nature of the mystery can also be interpreted as an acknowledgement that the great mystery of God in nature cannot be spoken or seen, or rather, it is up to an internal stillness and silence which may better convey the initiate into that mystical experience, and thereby be reborn as a revived, awakened soul. The word initiate in the Greek is mystes, which in the plural is mystai. Similarly, mystical is derived from the Greek word mystikos, which can be defined in much the same manner, as pertaining to an initiated mystic of secret rites. It is no accident that a later secondary definition of mystical exists, which reads, inspiring a sense of spiritual mystery, awe, and fascination, or concerned with the soul and the spirit. Now, the life of Plotinus is written by one of Plotinus's dearest friends and fellow Platonists, Porphyry, born in Tyre around 234 CE in Roman-ruled Phoenicia. It was Porphyry who Plotinus tasked with organizing the Enneads, and thus, in their introduction, Porphyry provides us the skeleton of a biography to which the following details of Plotinus's life are entirely indebted. To begin, we read, Plotinus, the philosopher our contemporary, seemed ashamed of being in the body, a feeling which led Plotinus never to speak of his birthplace or ancestry. When Emilius, one of Plotinus's friends, continually urged him to let a portrait be made of him, Plotinus said, quote, "Is it not enough to carry about this image in which nature has enclosed us? Do you really think I must also consent to leave, as a desired spectacle to posterity, an image of the image?" In order to finally get an image of Plotinus, an artist went to see him speak at the conferences of the philosophers, and made his initial sketches of a lifelike portrait. Plotinus was a strict vegetarian and suffered severe intestinal pains throughout his life. He did not allow his birthday to be celebrated, but did join in the celebration of Plato's. At 8 years old, Plotinus was going to school, and he is said to have clung to his nurse's breast for milk to the point of being called a perverted imp, after which he was ashamed and stopped. When he was 27, the spirit of philosophy captured him, and he sat before the most reputable lecturers and teachers in Alexandria. But he left these lectures always discouraged and saddened, and it was not until he was directed to the mysterious Ammonius Saccas that Plotinus, after hearing the man lecture, said, quote, "This was the man I was looking for." After studying under Ammonius for 11 years, he was determined to learn certain Persian philosophies adopted by the Indians. He attached himself to a military campaign by Emperor Gordian. However, when the emperor was assassinated by his soldiers, Plotinus had to make the arduous journey back to Antioch. Indeed, we will sadly never know what might have entered Plotinus's rich writings if he made it to the masters in the East, much as Pythagoras and Apollonius of Tyana are said to have done before him. At 40 years old, Plotinus settled in Rome. Certain colleagues with him vowed not to disclose the doctrines Ammonius revealed, but gradually the pact faltered, and these doctrines began to leak out in writings and conferences. Even at the age of around 49, Plotinus's writings seemed to be confined to unorganized notebooks until he began to compose his treatises. Porphyry says, "They were, as I was able to establish, by no means given about freely. In fact, the distribution was still grudging and secret. Those that obtained them had passed the strictest scrutiny." Among the many zealous followers Plotinus attracted in Rome were doctors and not a few Roman senators, who no doubt met with Plotinus's advice to avoid political life. One senator, Rogatianus, quote, advanced to such detachment from political ambitions that he gave up all his property, dismissed all his slaves, renounced every dignity. Rogatianus had been a victim of gout and was carried around in a chair, but this new regime of abstinence and abnegation restored his health. He had been unable to stretch out his hands. He came to use them as freely as men living by manual labor. Of his writings, Plotinus found it unbearable to go back and revise or reread his work. His eyesight wasn't excellent in any case, and his handwriting was terrible. He combined and misjoined words, invented terms, and cared nothing for spelling. Rather, it was the ideas behind the words that were the most important. His writing process was one of mental organization first. From first to last, he would organize his thoughts and then pin down his writings all in one go. In this way, Plotinus was an intimate of the Muses, if not one blessed by Hermes in the craft of writing. Although Plotinus advocated a life of contemplative detachment, this did not mean that he was impractical in understanding the demands of physical life, or that he failed to embody his philosophy in his daily existence. He had numerous deep friendships and relations, and one among several women who attached to him was Amphiclea, the wife of the son of Iamblichus. Plotinus lived at a house where he took care of many orphaned children, his surroundings being filled with youths to whom he taught his doctrines. Plotinus's internal world was ever focused on the divine, no matter what worldly affairs he managed. Nonetheless, he always gave his energy to aid even minor acquaintances. After 26 years in Rome, he made only one enemy. This was Olympius, an Alexandrian pupil of Ammonius, who became envious and jealous of Plotinus to the point of attempting to strike down Plotinus with star spells. But Olympius, quote, found his experiments recoiling upon himself, and he confessed to his associates that Plotinus possessed a mighty soul so powerful as to be able to hurl every assault back upon those who sought his ruin. Plotinus had felt the operation and declared that, at that moment, Olympius's limbs were convulsed, and his body shriveling like a money bag pulled tight. Olympius, perceiving on several attempts that he was endangering himself rather than Plotinus, desisted. When an Egyptian priest visited Rome and was presented to Plotinus, the priest offered to evoke a visible manifestation of Plotinus's presiding spirit. The priest prepared this demonstration at the temple of Isis, summoning a divinity who is not one among the spirit ranks but a true god. A mistake in the summons, however, did not allow them to consult the divinity in any detail. But this led Plotinus to write his famous tractate, Our Tutelary Spirit. On certain holy days, when Plotinus was asked to celebrate the new moon, he refused, saying, "It is for those beings to come to me, not for me to go to them." His remarkable penetration into a person's character led him to detect a household thief who stole a necklace, and predict accurately that one amorous young man would live a short life due to his habits. At a time when Porphyry was determined to end his own life, Plotinus unexpectedly showed up at Porphyry's house and told him to leave Rome, ultimately saving his life. Plotinus came into favor so much by Emperor Gallienus that a city of philosophers was almost built in Campania, but sadly never got off the ground. Though Plotinus believed in certain forms of divination, he criticized the utility and reality of horoscopes, which seemed to put a strain on the notions of free will. He also emphasized the difference between true philosophers and men of mere letters. He came into contact with certain Gnostics, whom he criticized for various reasons, leading him to write his treatise Against the Gnostics. And of his mystical experiences, his death, and the Apollonian Oracle made in his name, we must save for the end. Of the philosophical themes explored at great length in the Enneads, we will move from the one to the one many, or the all and Nous, and then to the nature of the soul and the systems at work by which we have found ourselves in this unique worldly existence. To Plotinus, there is but one singular source of all, from which all that is and ever will be is made possible. The one is infinite, always everywhere, and, quote, its definition, in fact, could only be the indefinable. It is beyond all language, and yet the greatest means to explain it through language would be perfect silence. It is pure goodness and power, without parts, and provides life to everything, but in itself has no experience of itself, for there is no other thing by which to compare or reflect it. Quote, seeking nothing, possessing nothing, lacking nothing, the one is perfect and, in our metaphor, has overflowed. No doubt it is wonderful that the first should thus be present, while it is nowhere, nowhere it is not. Plotinus compares the one to the sun, saying, quote, another example would be the sun, central to the light which streams from it and is yet linked to it, or at least is always about it, irremovably. Try all you will to separate the light from the sun, or the sun from its light. Forever the light is in the sun. The One, however unreachable and inexplicable by the human mind, establishes the simplest fundamentals of reality, which makes every complexity possible. If we reduce space to its simplest expression, it is an infinitesimal point in a limitless void. This point the One already occupies, and it establishes the principle of here. Time, reduced to its simplest expression, is the single moment of now. Thus the One occupies here and now at the most basic level, and emanates the laws of here and now, which no being will ever find themselves outside of. By all means, attempt to escape your here and now, and all you will end up with is a different point of view, a different, distinct perspective of that same here and now. Emanating as a result from the One is a secondary One, which is the first movement of the primal One and the first intellectual principle. This is the unified God, the One Many, the Nous, and the divine mind. Plotinus at times refers to it in different ways. Ultimately, this is the intelligible oneness that becomes all that is, and it is the first emanation through which the One experiences itself, now that it has given rise to the first branching out of the primal, ineffable One. Quote, the distinction is made between the primal One and a secondary One, which is One Many. This greatest, later than the divine unity, must be the divine mind. Plotinus explains, quote, there must be one principle constituting this unit of many forms of life, and enclosing the several members within the unity, while at the same time, precisely as in each thing of detail, the parts too have definite function. So in the all, each several member must have its own task, but more markedly so, since in this case the parts are not merely members, but themselves alls of greater power. In this way, all the entities take origin from one principle, fulfilling the unity by acting out their own individual purpose. Quote, and there is nothing undesigned, nothing of chance, in all the process. All is one scheme of differentiation, starting from the firsts and working itself out in a continuous progression of kinds. Thus the divine mind is what most have given the name of God. In this way, Plotinus elevates the primal One to the point of utter, unintelligible transcendence, which, if we were ever to experience a unification with, would be to us the closest thing a soul could come to annihilation, considering that in the primal One there would be no quality at all, merely beingness without form and beyond experiential reality. As the listener may have noticed, the fallibility of using language alone to wrestle with such lofty existences becomes obvious. On the nature of the soul, Plotinus says it is a divine being and a dweller in loftier realms, has entered body. It is a god, a later phase of the divine, but under stress of its powers and its tendency to bring order to its next lower, it penetrates to this sphere in a voluntary plunge. It has its source in the first, and thence, along an unhindered path, it flows into a total of things. And before that particular soul there is another soul, a universal, and before that an absolute soul. It has phases above and below. We now come into contact with the existence of the undescended self, the undescended higher part of the soul, which remains in the heavens and was, to use linear language, who we ultimately were prior to our current embodiment in physical reality. It is here also established that our plunge into the physical realm was voluntary, not a sentencing or an experience caused by any act of chance, but a proper act ordered by a soul's free will. Quote, but if the presiding spirit and the conditions of life are chosen by the soul in the overworld, how can anything be left to our independent action here? The answer is that very choice in the overworld is merely an allegorical statement of the soul's tendency and temperament, a total character which it must express wherever it operates. The Plotinian fall of the soul reveals much of the nocturnal symbolism portrayed in the mysteries, pertaining to the idea that the soul's projection into matter is at the origins of the evils that disturb the embodied individual's capacity to access a more complete spiritual existence. The soul in this way has a body. The body does not have a soul. Rather, the body is inside the soul, much as reality is inside of ourselves and not external to consciousness. Considering the primal one and the Nous are all that is, technically there is no externality in existence, only the capability of experiencing externality. Thus Plotinus compares the mystical union with the turning inside out of ourselves, recognizing that the seemingly outside world is an internal existent. Without the body, the immaterial soul does not take on the inhibitions of the senses or the double-edged desires which, if followed ceaselessly, lead the soul hither and thither into the muck, clouding the clarity of imagination and intellect and unnecessarily burdening the soul with certain fetters, which make the death process more difficult, in that such an unpurified soul will lack its bearings outside of the sense world, and at death will move in fear, knowing nothing but the sense world to take comfort in. If we therefore forget or never remember that we have an undescended, higher soul that serves as our guide, the ego personality attempts to take control, which is a function it was never meant to take sole responsibility for. Plotinus explains, quote, "This is the fall of the soul, this entry into matter, thence its weakness. Not all the faculties of its being retain free play, for matter hinders their manifestation. It encroaches upon the soul's territory and, as it were, crushes the soul back, and it turns to evil all that it has stolen, until the soul finds strength to advance again. The soul, by its projection into physical density, sinks into an alien life and takes on an ugliness. The soul is therefore compared to gold. Gold is degraded when it is mixed with earthly particles. If these be worked out, the gold is left and is beautiful. Isolated from all that is foreign, gold with gold alone. Hence the mysteries, with good reason, adumbrate the immersion of the unpurified in filth, even in the netherworld, since the unclean loves filth for its very filthiness, and swine, foul of body, find their joy in foulness. Courage is but being fearless of the death which is but the parting of the soul from the body to body, an event which no one can dread, whose delight it is to be his unmingled self. Indeed, a great theme of the mystery religions is that the initiate no longer fears death, having experienced a vision that confers the general truth of the soul's immortality. The unmingled self is the undescended intellect with which we may reunite upon shedding the body, or, while embodied, we can come into greater harmony with it through building a rapport that transcends the ego personality. This undescended aspect of the soul remains tethered above the heavens, and acts as a charioteer to steer the lower part if a strong link is built. This is a tutelary spirit, which is an aspect of our soul inseparable from who we truly are, but distinct from our ego personality. It is a super self, with total knowledge, unlimited by space, time, or physical density. Plotinus says, "Now in humanity the lower is not supreme, it is an accomplishment, but neither does the better rule unfailingly. The lower element also has a footing, and man therefore lives in part under sensation. This is why we must break away towards the high. We dare not keep ourselves set towards the sensuous principle, following the images of sense, or towards the merely vegetative, intent upon the gratifications of eating and procreation. Our life must be pointed toward the intellective, towards the intellectual principle, towards God." Plotinus elaborates on this lower part of the soul as that which is nearest to the earth, interwoven throughout the universe, presumably wherever physical realities exist to be embodied. The higher soul itself has a higher soul, which we might call an oversoul, which is the summation, the aggregate of all the mortal, embodied lives of a given soul. Quote, "This higher phase holds itself to the spheres, poised towards the above but hovering over the lesser soul and giving forth to it an effluence which makes it more intensely vital. The lower soul is moved by the higher, which actually resides in whatsoever part of it has thrust upwards and attained the spheres. The lower then, ringed round by the higher and answering its call, turns and tends towards it, and this upward tension communicates motion to the material frame in which it is involved." I've created these diagrams to hint at the system of reality relating to all of the aforementioned Plotinian features. Beginning from the higher planes in its non-physical and more unlimited contact with the absolute soul, our souls take on new lives and bodies, projecting into physical realities. Certain souls tend upward, linking with their higher minds, directed toward the themes of life they chose to explore prior to embodiment. Should a soul, however, become too densified, too entrapped by their negative ego personality, and through free will, refuse to allow intuition or the guiding whispers of their presiding spirit, the link with their higher minds becomes lost in the fogs of the senses, opening up the gates for more extreme, limited belief systems such as atheism and mechanistic worldviews, which now have it that the true reality is a thing which physical experiments alone can determine. At a collective level, these various fogs of desires, fears, and confusions disturb the natural course of the soul, prevent it from recognizing its chosen theme, and, upon physical death, thrust the soul unanchored into disembodied reality. When the soul thus finds itself in this immaterial realm, having never connected or given thought to the reality of the gods and the higher planes of existence, let alone to behavioral virtue or mental quietude, it is far more likely that the soul will attract, through fear, the only comforts that it knows, another embodiment in physical reality. On the other hand, those souls who have grown to form a strong link with their presiding spirit find themselves in familiar hands, recognizing death and disembodied reality as a more natural state of affairs, and knowing that many guides and higher aspects exist, which may now be called upon for guidance in the new reality, on the basis of love, beauty, and adventure. Now the great theme at the levels of the absolute soul can be penetrated, gifting the soul with certainty about its next decision. Plotinus illustrates that those who strengthen this link and thus give way for mystical experiences become convinced of such needs for ascension. Quote, "This indeed is the mood of those who, having witnessed the manifestation of gods or supernals, can never again feel the old delight in the comeliness of material forms. And for this the sternest and uttermost combat is set before the souls. All our labor is for this, lest we be left without part in this noblest vision, which to attain is to be blessed in the blissful sight, which to fail of is to fail utterly." Plotinus assures us there is always within us not only the capacity for happiness, but the possibility of better matching the reflective reality of our world with that guidance of our tutelary spirit. In regards to understanding mortal death and the capacity of the disembodied soul, Plotinus gives exact instructions. Quote, "What then is our course? What the manner of our flight? This is not a journey for the feet. The feet bring us only from land to land, nor need you think of coach or ship to carry you away. All this order of things you must set aside and refuse to see. You must close the eyes and call instead upon another vision, which is to be waked within you, a vision, the birthright of all, which few turn to use. But how are you to see into a virtuous soul and know its lovingness? Withdraw into yourself and look. And if you do not find yourself beautiful yet, Act as the creator of a statue that is to be made beautiful. He cuts away here, he smooths there. He makes this line lighter, this other purer, until a lovely face has grown upon his work. So do you also. Cut away all that is excessive. Straighten all that is crooked. Bring light to all that is overcast. Labor to make all one glow of beauty, and never cease chiseling your statue, until there shall shine out on you from it the godlike splendor of virtue, until you shall see the perfect goodness surely established in the stainless shrine. This exemplifies the Plotinian way and is exact prescriptive advice for those who do not yet find themselves beautiful. Perhaps for those who have not yet experienced the beholding of a marvelous beauty as Plotinus did when his soul was lifted out of the body, as we shall see. This chiseling away of impurities reminds Freemasons of the many analogous renderings of moral philosophy which line up neatly to the Masonic virtues, which are called upon for a soul to perfect themselves and match with that theme of life they have chosen to explore. Quote, when you know you have become this perfect work, when you are self gathered in the purity of your being, nothing now remaining that can shatter that inner unity, nothing from without clinging to the authentic man, when you find yourself wholly true to your essential nature, wholly that only invariable light, which is not measured by space, not narrowed to any circumscribed form, nor again diffused as a thing void of term, but ever unmeasurable as something greater than all measure and more than all quantity. When you perceive that you have grown to this, you are now to become very vision. Now call upon your confidence, strike forward yet a step. You need a guide no longer. Strain and see. This internal eye sees the mystical beauty. It adventures into the vision and cannot be dimmed by vices and impurities, or blinded to what lies in plain sight. Quote, never did I see the sun unless it had first become sun-like. Never can the soul have vision of the first beauty unless itself be beautiful. Therefore first let each become godlike, and each beautiful who cares to see God and beauty. Plotinus mentions Heraclitus, who examined the ascent and descent of souls, but who did not necessarily write of it so clearly as to be easily understood. Plotinus suggests this is so that we may seek the knowledge of it for ourselves and in ourselves. Inevitably, we wonder how much of this seek for yourself manner of instruction Plotinus also engaged with. We can see by his many ascensions and divine visions that he has penetrated to the experiences that allow him to hone in on these subjects from a matter-of-fact, direct experience. After this experience is rooted in the beliefs of the individual, behold, one no longer needs previous levels of guidance, as greater unity with the higher self has been achieved. Plotinus says, many times it has happened, lifted out of the body into myself, becoming external to all other things and self-in-centered, beholding a marvelous beauty. Then, more than ever, assured of community with the loftiest order, enacting the noblest life, acquiring identity with the divine, stationing within it by having attained that activity, poised above whatsoever within the intellectual is less than the supreme, yet there comes the moment of descent from intellection to reasoning, and after that sojourn to the divine, I ask myself how it happens that I can now be descending, and how did the soul ever enter into my body, the soul which, even within the body, is the high thing it has shown itself to be. This is by far one of the most important mystical passages of Plotinus. Though he reveals much of his own personal mysticism here, he also shows how there is a great mystery as to the nature of the descent. Because once a soul finds itself in these unlimited realms, unified in love and beauty with the universal God, the idea of densifying oneself to the point of forgetting even that the pre-birth realms exist and that immortality is a natural certainty is utterly alien, especially when this ascended soul is still tethered to a body and is not yet released back into the heavens by mortal death. Such were primary teachings of the mystery religions, which Plotinus on many occasions openly refers to, defining what it is that we must do in mortal life in order to reconnect slacked threads binding our physical personalities to the core divine self. Quote, "Therefore we must ascend again towards the good, the desired of every soul. Anyone that has seen this knows what I intend when I say it is beautiful. It is desired as the goal of desire. To attain it is for those that will take the upward path, who will set all their forces towards it, who will divest themselves of all that we have put on in our descent. So, to those that approach the holy celebrations of the mysteries, there are appointed purifications, and the laying aside of garments worn before, and the entry into nakedness, until, passing on the upward way, all that is other than the God, each in the solitude of himself, shall behold that solitary existence, the apart, the unmingled, the pure, that from which all things depend, for which all look and live and act and know, the source of life and intellection and of being." And of Plotinus's own personal experiences with being lifted up to that place where the garments are cast away, we read from Porphyry, quote, "He labored strenuously to free himself and rise above the bitter waves of this blood-drenched life, and this is why, to Plotinus, godlike and lifting himself often, by the ways of meditation and by the methods Plato teaches in the banquet, to the first and all-transcendent God, that God appeared, the God who has neither shape nor form but sits enthroned above the intellectual principle and all the intellectual sphere. There was shown to Plotinus the term ever near. For the term, the one end of his life was to become uniate, to approach to the God over all, and 4 times during the period I passed with him, he achieved this term, by no mere latent fitness, but by the ineffable act. To this God I also declare, I, Porphyry, that in my 68th year, I too was once admitted, and I entered into union." In the 66th year of his life, Plotinus was dying in bed, and Eustochius, his friend, at last came to Plotinus, and our beloved philosopher said in his last words, quote, "I have been a long time waiting for you. I'm striving to give back the divine in myself to the divine in the all." And as he spoke these words, a snake crept under his bed and slipped out through a hole in the wall, and at the same moment Plotinus died. After his death, Plotinus's dear student Emilius consulted the Appollonian Oracle to learn where Plotinus's soul had gone beyond death, and included in Apollo's lengthy response is the following: "Oft times as you strove to rise above the bitter waves of this blood-drenched life, above the sickening whirl, toiling in the midmost of the rushing flood and the unimaginable turmoil, oft times from the ever-blessed there was shown to you the term still close at hand, oft times when your mind thrust out awry and was like to be wrapped down unsanctioned paths, the immortals themselves prevented, guiding you on the straight-going way to the celestial spheres, pouring down before you a dense shaft of light that your eyes might see from amid the mournful gloom. Sleep never closed those eyes. High above the heavy murk of the mist you held them. Tossed in the welter, you still had vision. Still you saw sights, many and fair, not granted to all that labor in wisdom's quest. But now that you have cast the screen aside, quitted the tomb that held your lofty soul, you enter at once the heavenly consort, where fragrant breezes play, where all is unison and winning tenderness and guileless joy, and the place is lavish of the nectar streams the unfailing gods bestow, with the blandishments of the loves, and delicious airs and tranquil sky, where Minos and Rhadamanthus dwell, great brethren of the golden race of mighty Zeus, where dwell the just Aeacus and Plato, consecrated power and stately Pythagoras, and all else that form the choir of immortal love, that share their parentage with the most blessed spirits. There where the heart is ever lifted in joyous festival, O Blessed One, you have fought your many fights. Now, crowned with unfading life, your days are with the ever-holy. Rejoicing muses, let us stay our song and the subtle windings of our dance. Thus much I could but tell to my golden lyre of Plotinus, the hallowed soul. Thank you for watching this brief look into the mystical life and philosophy of Plotinus. Please like and subscribe and consider supporting my Patreon, linked below in the description, where you can get access to many rare PDFs, custom graphs, ad-free videos, and much more to come. American Esoteric is dedicated to presenting a synthesis of Western esotericism, modern mysticism, and post-disclosure universalism, building connections between ancient philosophies and modern discoveries. Thank you.